Tennessee is under NCAA investigation once again. This time, the investigation involves potential violations to the NCAA's NIL guidelines. And this time, Tennessee is fighting back. Not only is Tennessee Chancellor Donde Plowman throwing some elbows back at the NCAA, but the Tennessee State Attorney General is suing the NCAA, alleging that its NIL guidelines violate the Sherman Antitrust Act and unlawfully restrict athletes' ability to monetize their NIL. Welcome in to the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer, alongside the Knoxville News Sentinel's Adam Sparks and John Adams. Tennessee is the story of the week in college sports this week, and it has bubbled over into the courtroom. I'm sure you've been following along with Adam's coverage at knoxnews.com, John's commentary. So let's get right into it. Adam, who faces the possibility of bigger trouble here? Is it Tennessee or is it the NCAA, who routinely gets dunked on in the courts? We've seen this before, all the way up to the high court, and now they are being sued by the state's attorney general in Tennessee and Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, the NCAA could suffer more long-term in this. What's on the line for Tennessee is, it could be a lack of institutional control against the university. That's the highest charge a university can face. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that was referenced by Donde Plowman in her letter to the NCAA president. So that's on the table. And by the way, that would probably be under the repeat offender clause. That's because they just got hit with the Jeremy Pruitt case. And now if you get hit again within a certain amount of time, you get hit harder. And so, and that would possibly bring a postseason ban into the table. I'm not saying any of that's going to happen, but it's certainly a possibility. If you look at how Donde Plowman approached this, how she came out firing, which chancellors usually don't do in an ongoing investigation. She came out firing away, and we got a hold of that letter through a public records request and put that out there. And then Danny White today, as we record this, came out with a public statement ripping the NCAA, its NIL rules, how it's been slow to change, even ripped the NCAA for the fact that it, as he said, leaked this to the media. He means SI.com and Pet 40 specifically in that.
Because that's the big news here, right? Is whether who got leaked and who got tipped off.
That's right. So for Tennessee, and Nico's eligibility is, would be the doomsday scenario. I've said this during the week, and I'll say it again. I'm not saying any of that stuff is happening, but doomsday worst case scenario is you're worried about eligibility of your quarterback because he is implicated in this, and you're also worried about any kind of lack of institutional control charge that would could put a postseason ban on Tennessee. Again, not saying that's going to happen, but it's on the table. That's what could happen to Tennessee. That's not good. That's not even close to good. But long term, the NCAA faces more. In the lawsuit that the Tennessee State Attorney General filed, along with Virginia, there's a restraining order that's attached to that, and the restraining order is basically asking the court to approve a restraining order to stop all NIL rules under the NCAA. In other words, if that restraining order is granted for whatever period of time it is granted, NIL rules under the NCAA do not exist for that period of time. That means we've talked about the wild, wild west. That would really, really be the wild, wild west. There'd be no rules. I mean, you could, if that restraining order is granted, you could suddenly have a high school freshman going on live stream and asking for the top bidders of any collective in the country. I'm on sale for $1 million. Who wants me? And there'd be nothing that the NCAA could do about that. So that long term, there's more on the line for the NCAA in this, but I think Tennessee fans obviously care about any harsh penalties against against the Vols, and I think it's serious. Otherwise, Donde Plowman and Danny White would not come out with this sort of venom. I don't think they're doing this thinking, it's nothing. I think they're coming out knowing that it's serious, and that's why they're saying what they're saying.
John, your thoughts?
Well, I can't imagine Tennessee losing in court. I can't imagine the NCAA winning in court. This all goes back to another court case in which the court ruled that athletes have a right to profit off their name, image, and likeness. Once that law was in place, and once the NCAA reacted, it had no choice but to react accordingly. It said, yeah, you can profit off this. Then it also said, but this can't be used as a recruiting inducement. Well, how could it not be a recruiting inducement? A student athlete needs to know if he can make money. If he has a right to make money, he needs to know how much money he can make. He has a right to comparative shopping. What school would offer this through its collective? And so the NCAA, once that was put in place by the courts, the NCAA to come out and say, well, you can't use this for recruiting inducement, that's laughable. And that's why that would never hold up in court.
Yeah, so to rewind a little bit here, NIL went into effect in 2021. And at that time, the NCAA basically had two guidelines. One, NIL couldn't be used as recruiting inducements, and two, that NIL couldn't be used as pay for play. But for the last few years, the NCAA really hasn't done much to try to enforce its guidelines or penalize anybody if they felt either collectives or athletes or schools were running afoul of their guidelines. And I think, behind the scenes, I think what a lot of us were hearing were the NCAA was worried about whether it actually could enforce those guidelines. And all the while, we've had NCAA leaders, conference leaders, people from individual universities going up to Capitol Hill and begging federal lawmakers for A, either some federal NIL legislation, or B, an antitrust exemption. And for the last few years, Congress would put on the dog and pony show. They'd tell a few wisecracks. They'd poke fun at the NCAA, get some sound bites, but nothing happened, right? There was no relief. This Hail Mary to Congress wasn't completed. And so now what you have is 3 years down the road, the NCAA is trying to enforce the few flimsy guardrails and ever-changing guardrails that it had, including the pay-for-play and recruiting inducements. But, and I'm no lawyer here, but this is the armchair lawyering, without that antitrust exemption, this lawsuit is alleging that this flies in the face to the Sherman Antitrust Act, which, generally speaking, says you can't inhibit free competition among people engaged in commerce. And to your point, John, I mean, that is language that came from Brett Kavanaugh in that Supreme Court decision in 2021. So what's interesting to me here is when this story first broke at the beginning of this week, and Adam, was there at the start at knoxnews.com giving us the coverage, it seemed like there was this debate of, well, what rules were in place? When were they in place? Did Tennessee violate any of these rules? To me, that was sort of a little bit of a smokescreen in the early moments. And the real story is here, not so much about when the NCAA had these rules and the changing nature of the rules, but the bottom line is, can they even have these rules? Are these rules, flimsy though they may be, even lawful? And that's what's on the line, it seems like, in this lawsuit from the Tennessee Attorney General and the Virginia Attorney General. Adam, your additional thoughts on that, and when we may see a ruling on this lawsuit and what that might mean for Tennessee.
We may have one in terms of the restraining order as we record. It's up in the air as we record this. In terms of Tennessee, in the NCAA case, it's hard to say because we haven't got a notice of allegations yet as we record this. could come any day, it could come in a while. Usually these NIL cases are working faster than other cases are. So I think it'll be sooner than later. There's so much in question here because, like you mentioned, so many of these rules are flimsy now, but they've been flimsy from the start because they've changed so much. So much has been reliant on state laws. The NCAA has been behind on anything. They would set a rule and then state laws would supersede it. And so then they would sort of change their laws, adjust their laws to get closer to what their rules to get closer to what the state laws are. And then the state laws change again. And you start the whole process over. Like, for example, let's speculate a little bit here. If you look at it was originally reported by the New York Times that there's a implication that Nico Iamaleava took a private jet that was provided in some way by the NIL collective, Spire Sports. That's the Tennessee NIL collective. That reporting from the New York Times said that he took a flight, a private jet, and that's what's in question in part of this NCAA case, that is a alleged recruiting inducement. Okay, that may be the case. Now, under the old system before NIL, that absolutely would be a recruiting inducement. If it's a booster, that is, if it's a UT booster. If a UT booster just randomly flew a recruit somewhere, then that would be a violation under the old way. Under the new way, under NIL, it's vague. It's hard to figure because, again, let's speculate. Let's say that that did happen and the booster was a donor to the NIL collective. If you put up a Venn diagram of donors to the NIL collective and donors to the school boosters, that's two circles on top of each other. Like it's the same group. It's not like there's different people in those two. So if a donor to the collective is giving their resources to the collective to use for a client or employee, that being the player, is that a booster providing something to a recruit? I don't know. Is that person acting as a booster, or are they acting as a representative of the collective that's paying that client? That's some of the things that they're potentially dealing with right now in definitions of what these things are. If you look back at the reporting I had back in May of 2022, it came. So Nico committed in March of 2022. And he actually signed his NIL deal reportedly 10 days before his commitment. So he signs his NIL deal. 10 days later, he commits to Tennessee. And then 7 weeks after that, I think it was like 50 days, something like that, NCAA comes out with a new policy and says, hey, we're just reinforcing the fact that you cannot do recruiting inducements through NIL. That was already in the books. That was a policy. We're reinforcing that. And we're going to go backwards to enforce that rule if you didn't understand it the first time. And we're also going to view some collectives in some egregious situations. We're going to view collectives as boosters. And that's, to me, that looks like that's a straightforward shot at the alleged Nico and Tennessee situation. Because all those things that now the reporting looks like it matches what the NCAA was reacting to. And so if you look back almost 2 years, it looked like Tennessee and Nico were a target of these things. And we're probably going to find out that they were once we get a notice of allegations.
John, how do you see this ending? Where do you see it going from here?
Well, the ball's kind of in the NCAA's court now. Tennessee is pretty much said what it plans to do. It's come across as forceful as you can. The NCAA, I mean, Adam alluded to this, the NCAA has more to lose here than Tennessee does. It has a possibility of the court saying your rules just don't hold up. You can't enforce your own rules of your organization. I think it would be wise for the NCAA to say, upon further review, we're going to we've investigated this further, and we really don't think it's necessary that anybody needs to be punished or penalized here. To me, there's no way the NCAA wins because all of the court cases are for the individual. And you talked about this, Blake, and about the right to earn money and that kind of thing. And it's really funny when Adam's talking about it, it's like the NCAA started out and said, you can't use this as recruiting inducement. Okay, nothing happens. We go along. Schools are clearly using it as a recruiting inducement. And then the NCAA comes out and says, no, we really mean it. No, you can't use it as a recruiting inducement. We were serious about that, okay? I mean, come on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people believe that this will eventually end at some point in some collective bargaining. I mean, that's one way to handle antitrust is you come to the table, you collectively bargain, and then you're not dragged into court over situations like this. But up to this point, we've seen no effort, no coming to the table from the NCAA side of things to collectively bargain. And in the absence of collective bargaining or antitrust exemptions, I think the NCAA is going to continue to get hauled off to court. And if history is a guide, they're going to continue to lose in court. Now, some have speculated, will this bring death to the NCAA? I don't know about all of that, but what it could bring is, as we've been discussing here, the NCAA admitting that it does not have the power to enforce any NIL guidelines. And further, maybe the NCAA dials itself down as a rule enforcing entity, period. And some of that rule enforcement is handled more so by the conferences, which we saw in a different case to a certain degree when it pertained to Jim Harbaugh. The Big Ten stepped in and issued Harbaugh a 3-game suspension and got involved in that situation. I do wonder if at some point down the road, if the NCAA admits, hey, its enforcement arm has no teeth anymore, even the guidelines that it wants to enforce, it's having difficulty getting to hold up in court, and so they don't really have any future as it pertains to some of this enforcement situations, especially as it involves NIL. But Adam, you mentioned, the thing on Tennessee's fans' mind, probably number one. I mean, yeah, maybe they are or aren't rooting for the demise of the NCAA, right? But they want to know, is a postseason ban coming? Is, any punishment toward, Nico or others coming? How likely do you think, I know it's early days, could be tough to say here, but generally speaking, how likely do you think is that this could result in Tennessee facing some stiff penalties up to and including a postseason ban?
The Nico ineligibility question, again, I'll present that as that's the absolute worst case scenario. I don't think that's going to happen for a few reasons. But number one, it looks like the way that the NCAA is attacking NIL is that they're going after the collectives first and then the university a close second. If you look in the Florida State case, that was a negotiated resolution. It was like a plea bargain. They agreed on it. The verdict basically was that there was a 2-year separation, I think, between the collective and the school, and then there was a 3-year separation between a booster and the school, and then an assistant coach also got a show cause penalty in that. But it looks like they're targeting the collectives first, not individual athletes. So I think Nico is probably going to get out of this fine, if Nico is in fact even implicated in the violations. We don't know that for sure. In the alleged violations, we don't know that till a notice of allegations comes out. But that's just from some reporting. So I think Nico's probably going to be fine. But that's the doomsday scenario, that his eligibility is in question at all. The thing about the collectives is the NCAA hates collectives because they hate the system that created collectives. And so that's why I think that's so much of their target in this. They're trying to rein in what collectives are doing there's some envy there of what they're doing in college sports, because collectives and NIL are running a lot of college sports and NCAA isn't. So they're trying to get some of that power back. In terms of Tennessee, postseason ban or anything like that, I think you've got to go from like point A to point Z, and Z is the postseason ban. And, somewhere in between A and Z would be that Tennessee faces allegations of university misdeeds. And then after that, does that raise to the level that it's a lack of institutional control? That's the harshest penalty. If it gets to that, then absolutely postseason ban is on the table. But that's A to Z, and we're still on A right now. And once we see what the allegations are, that's B, and then we'll see how harsh they are. I think, if I remember right, it was either mentioned, referenced, or hinted at in Donde Plowman's letter to the NCAA president that no staff or employees had been named. That's going to be sort of an interesting thread, that a needle that's going to have to be threaded by the NCAA. How can you accuse a university of allegations up to the level of lack of institutional control if you can't name an employee that committed violations? Now, under the repeat offender clause, you can just say, well, they were bad in the Jeremy Pruitt case, and because they did something else, they're now super bad. And so you're just, you got life in prison. Now you did something else, you're going to get the death penalty or something. So they could do that, but it's going to be a difficult case, I would think, for the NCAA to make. But I'm saying all that not knowing what the allegations are. And once we know the allegations, I think we need to sort of reset. This may be something where we say, NCAA, that's really all you had, like all this, and that's it. Or we could look at it and say, woo, Tennessee, I know why you were coming out firing now, because you're in trouble. It's probably going to be in between those two, but we'll know more once we see what they're actually accused of. Tennessee thinks it's serious because it's coming out firing, or Tennessee is coming out firing because they think there's nothing there and they think this is wasting their time. We'll see which one it is.
John, Adam's I believe, has to respond to some breaking news here, so we're going to let him go as we record this on a Thursday afternoon. And I'm going to wrap up here with you, John. And again, this is all very fluid. And for those who want to check in on what Adam's latest is, as you listen to this, you can find it over at knoxnews.com. But I want to close with you, John, as we've seen the NCAA take, very recently has kind of got involved in trying to regulate these NIL waters. There's a probe going on at Florida. We saw Florida State, in particular, one of its assistant coaches, I believe, endure some penalties over an NIL situation. And now, Tennessee is in the spotlight, and others. Does it surprise you that, I guess, the school to really push back on the NCAA and try to take this to a court battle? Does it surprise you that it's Tennessee? Would you have figured that Tennessee might be the one to go down this road? I mean, you've covered this university for a long time. You've seen these NCAA investigations come and go, not involving NIL, but what's your reaction to that? Did you think it could be Tennessee, or does this come as a surprise to you?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. One thing to weigh in all this, because I have been covering this program for a while, Tennessee for so long has suffered from horrible leadership at the very top of its university system. And it went right on down through all the administrators and into coaching, football coaching in particular, all kinds of problems. But it all stemmed from a lack of quality leadership. Tennessee now has quality leadership. Strong-willed people who do their homework and pick their battles wisely. And Tennessee fans can take heart from that. That these people, Donde Plowman is chancellor, Danny White is athletic director, go on further up the ladder to the president of the university, Randy Boyd. These are competent people. They proved that. That's their track record. So I think fans can be confident of how Tennessee will handle that. But I don't think they would do this. I mean, putting them in sort of an attorney's role, attorneys don't like to take on cases they can't win. And I don't think Tennessee would have reacted this way unless it thought it could win the way it was going. I mean, Donde Plowman came on as strong as any administrator I've ever heard in conjunction with the NCAA. Danny White today issued a statement that had the same kind of tone. So, yeah, I'm not surprised at this. Maybe with previous administrations, I would have been incredibly surprised, because I think they would probably said, "Oh my God, what do we do now? We're done for," and just raised a white flag. But these people are a lot more competent, and I think they are capable of managing in a crisis situation, sort of crisis. That might be overreaction.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me either that the support for Tennessee goes all the way straight up to the governor, to the attorney general. I mean, that's important, if you want to challenge the NCAA in court, that your state elected officials, including Governor Bill Lee and the Tennessee Attorney General in this case, have your back. I wouldn't have doubted, knowing the university leadership that you referenced at Tennessee, that they could expect the full support from their government officials, and we are seeing that, and we're also seeing that this story is ever changing. Again, Adam's been on top of the coverage from the word go. The news may have changed even further since we recorded this. We apologize if that's the case, but we don't control the flow of information. But so catch up on the latest from Adam over at knoxnews.com. John will continue to have the commentary, and hopefully we will have an update for you on the next edition of the Volunteer State. Thanks for listening.